Welcome to ChamberLIVE, brought to you by the East Lancashire Chamber of Commerce. Today's edition of the HR Forum is sponsored by Forbes solicitors. The views expressed in this webinar don't necessarily represent the views of the East Lancashire Chamber of Commerce, and all facts were believed to be correct at the time of recording, which is the 2nd of March 2021. Now, it's 49 weeks since the Prime Minister first told us to stay at home, protect the NHS and save lives. And in those 49 weeks, the pandemic has had an enormous impact on our professional and our personal lives and cost over 123,000 lives in the UK. It's impacted everyone in some way. It's had a huge impact on the mental health and emotional well-being of the nation. We've all interacted less. Many have spent almost a year working from home. And even as we unlock that prevalence of home working, those greater levels of isolation are likely to continue. So, against that backdrop, how do we look out for ourselves and others? Well, that's a huge question, and one that thankfully I don't have to answer. Julie does. Julie Stirpe is a psychotherapist with 35 years experience and an expert witness to the family justice system. She started JSA Psychotherapy as a small practice 17 years ago. It's now the largest psychotherapy and psychology practice in the northwest of England. She also founded and is practice director of Life Change Care Limited, which offers 4 trauma-informed residential children's homes. As such, she's got a wealth of clinical experience, also considerable business development and management experience at director level, employing over 70 people across those 2 companies, which brings with it much experience of employee well-being, mental health in the workplace, workforce development and retention. The bit she didn't tell me in her bio, but I found on her website, is that she's got a lifelong passion for horses and dogs, and is a keen equestrian and dressage enthusiast. And it's a pleasure to welcome her to ChamberLIVE and the HR Forum this morning. Over to you, Julie.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. So I presume you're doing the slides, Simon, from your end. Okay. Can we start with the slides? Thank you. Okay, I think a lot of that's actually been covered, but good morning, everybody. It's an absolute delight to be here with you today. I think when I was first invited to speak this morning back in December, we were celebrating that it would be one of the first live events or direct events that we would be doing. And unfortunately, here we are, still in lockdown and within those 49 weeks. Anyway, this morning I've got a very big topic to cover. So there will be limitations to what I'm doing this morning, but I'm hoping just to give you a taster of some of the mental health issues that have always been around for us, but may well have been exacerbated now by the pandemic. I think we've probably covered that first slide. I think one thing I would pick up there is that JSA Psychotherapy offer extensive training in mental health first training. So everybody's interested pursuing that, please let me know after the this morning. Next slide. So this morning, what I want to cover in this 30 minutes is just to kind of dip into mental health and emotional well-being at work. I think that there's the term mental health is being used quite heavily these days, and there is a distinction between mental health and emotional well-being, and that sometimes we need to separate out the two. So what I'm actually going to do this morning within the limitations of today is to first of all identify some of the most common mental health issues that we see in society and the workplace today. And I'm going to start with the common mental health problems, which is sort of helping you to identify anxiety and depression and stress in yourselves and in others. And then I'm going to look and move on to talk about what you could do as organisations to support the workforce, in terms of having trained mental health or emotional well-being champions. This is an idea that we've been looking at now for a couple of years and supporting businesses to identify and train that person. As I've already mentioned, mental health first aid is the first step in that. And then, of course, I am going to talk about a pandemic. We can't avoid it. We have to talk about COVID, and we have to have a reflection on what's actually happened. And I'm sure it's a topic that is on everybody's agenda as we start to move out of this, hopefully out of this third lockdown phase. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, some statistics just to start with. These statistics are taken from the Mental Health Foundation and are quite stark, actually. We often find that anxiety and depression come hand in hand, and actually these two are the most common disorder that you will come across in the workplace, probably. 7.8% of people are meeting a criteria for diagnosis. So this is we'll look at how we move through that kind of process a bit later on. It asks the question, doesn't it, that statistic, how many people are undiagnosed when 7.8% of the population are meeting the criteria for diagnosis. 4 to 10% of people in England will experience depression in their lifetime. Again, so you're thinking about the number of delegates that we have today, and just reflecting, that this is a really common issue, often stigmatized, but is, affects a huge number of us at some point in our lives. Common mental health problems, as we're talking about here, depression and anxiety. Now, this is quite interesting. It's distributed according to economic disadvantage across society. So the poorer and more disadvantaged are disproportionately affected by common mental health problems and the consequences of those. And when I first read this, I sort of sat back and thought, I'm not sure whether that's what I've experienced in the the years that I've been practicing, and see people presenting from across the spectrum of society. However, I think really what lies behind this is that those who are at an economic disadvantage are more likely to feel helpless and hopeless, and to feel trapped in their circumstances, and may have less resources available to them and less resilience, therefore, to lift themselves out of the situations that they find themselves in. So it is, I think this actually sets the way for later on, talking about how we can help ourselves and how we can help each other out of and build resilience to common mental health and well-being issues. Mixed anxiety and depression has been estimated to cause 1/5 of the working days lost in Britain in the workforce, and 1 in 6 adults have had a common mental health disorder. So very, very high numbers there, very high figures. I have some statistics actually that I wasn't going to put on and include today, but these are about the actual number of days that are lost due to mental health problems, and the actual cost to society and to businesses for those days lost. So this is always worth bearing in mind. Those statistics today obviously sit amongst the cost to the workforce and to the businesses on the impact of mental health in the workforce. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to have a look today at depression and anxiety and stress, really, when anxiety becomes, or stress becomes anxiety. I think is the most common forms of mental health compromise that you will come across. There are obviously other types of mental health issue that we commonly tend to think of as being more severe, such as bipolar, schizoid disorders, personality disorders, a very complex area. Is it mental health, or is it is this more of a personality issue for a person, and how treatable is a personality disorder, and what impact will that have in the workplace? I think ADHD and autistic spectrum disorder as well are mental health issues, and often go unnoticed in the workplace. But I think we would be here for a lot longer time if I were then going into the impact of these fairly common disorders. So today we're just going to focus on depression and anxiety, but obviously at a later date, or if you would like me to give you more information at some point on a more in-depth look at the other mental health disorders, that's something that I'd be more than happy to do. But for today and the limitations of this morning, we're just going to have a look at depression and anxiety is probably the most common, as we say, from the statistics. So depression, what does depression mean? Depression means to depress, to squash something, doesn't it? To push something down. You know, we talk about low mood, depression, the depression and suppression of feelings. And really, depression is what starts to happen, I guess, in our brain and brain chemistry when we're unable to actually deal with strong emotions and with overwhelming emotions as well, and circumstances. There are different types of depression that you may hear about, or you may see on doctors' notes as well, and people's records. Circumstantial depression is probably the most common, and I think with the statistic that we saw before, which says that maybe 1 in 6 people will experience depression in their lifetime. Yes, and can actually be a reaction to circumstances such as bereavement, to illness, accidents, loss of employment, many circumstances through our lives that occur. As we know, there are certain things that come very high up on the stress levels, don't they? Such as divorce and big changes of including, you know, that incorporate loss in some way. I think then will go on to cause circumstantial depression. So circumstantial depression is a period of clinical depression in relation to those circumstances. What GPs will usually do with a person who's presenting with circumstantial depression is often prescribe what we call SSRI antidepressants, and a course of counselling or therapy. And so it's either or of those things. Often antidepressants aren't required, and access to counselling and psychotherapy, and a chance to talk through the circumstances and to process the circumstances and the impact of the circumstances will then lead to resolution of that depression and the building of resilience and accommodation of those circumstances and the impact that they've had on a person's life. We also talk about cyclical depression, which is a recurring, that's an underlying vulnerability to depression. This is where triggers may then set off an episode of depression in a person, and this will this can often go undiagnosed or unnoticed, and usually people, quite often people will carry on having these episodes of depression, but then kind of come out of it and feel okay again, and so quite often don't get the treatment that they need. So this is something to look out for, I think, in the workplace as well, of people who seem to go through these cycles of depressive episodes or low mood episodes. Also, I'm very keen on bringing your awareness to masked depression, which will often present in somatic body problems such as chronic backache, headaches, and chronic fatigue, and never really gets diagnosed as depression, but recurring episodes of body problems, and that particularly back pain, that never really get diagnosed as with the underlying cause of depression. So let's have a look at let's think about kind of low mood, which is a brief period of disturbance, sadness, low mood, loss of motivation, but is resolved fairly quickly. That is not depression. We can look at circumstantial depression, and cyclical depression, and masked depression. And when these issues don't get resolved, they can start to become and formulate what we would then diagnose as clinical depression, which is a more severe form and more entrenched episode of depression. When a person is suffering from clinical depression, we see changes in the brain chemistry, and increasing inability, I think, to function, to find any resolution to the depth of the impact of that depression. As I mentioned before, common antidepressants are what we call SSRI medication, which stands for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And these are medications such as fluoxetine, Prozac, citalopram, and various others that you will come across as prescribed as medications for people in the workforce. These are what I would describe as lighter weight antidepressants. They're not addictive, and they increase, they allow the brain to retain levels of serotonin, which is basically our happy chemical, and help the nervous system and the brain to retain the amount of serotonin that it is producing, rather than sort of losing it into the system. And this gradually then lifts the mood of the person and allows them to find more resources of their own to actually find their way through that depressive episode. It's usually coupled with some form of therapy, either psychodynamic therapy or counselling, which will go to the root cause of depression, or CBT, cognitive behaviour therapy, which is probably more in relation to circumstantial depression and cyclical depression. And quite often what we need to do is go back to the root cause in a deeper depression or an unresolved depression. But those are the common treatment forms. In clinical depression, in a more severe period of clinical depression. Then drugs such as mirtazapine, which is a common antidepressant, may be used over a period of time to resolve and to reorganize the brain chemistry, which these kind of antidepressants obviously then require more management for the person to actually come off them. Sometimes we see prescriptions of both of mirtazapine and citalopram, etc. In the more complex cases, there might actually be unrelenting episodes of depression, and we might see a kind of dual prescription. But that just to give you an idea of the common treatment, medication treatments, all which should be coupled with some form of talking therapy, behaviour therapy. And on the slide here, forgive me, the writing is very small, but I think if you're looking out for the symptoms of depression in yourself or in your colleagues or employees in the workplace, I think the common ones really are obviously changes in emotions, thoughts, behaviour, and physical presentation. Emotions around depression are increased sadness. Anxiety is not an emotion. This is anxiety we're going to talk about in the next slide. But what I would say here is fear, rather than the word anxiety, is sadness and fear. Feelings of guilt, feelings of anger, which will then create mood swings. So the person seems quite unstable and dysregulated, and may change from one day to the next, and may have periods of feeling very, very sad and then seem okay. Really important here are the feelings of helplessness and hopelessness, which I think then starts to lead to more serious manifestations of depression, where people feel that there really is no hope for them to get out of these disturbing and unresolved feelings and emotions. We'll see a change in behaviour in people. I think withdrawal, depression causes withdrawal and a remoteness and disconnection from others. So people who might normally be quite gregarious or bubbly and have a sense of humour may really begin to change and seem withdrawn and remote, and not joining in social events or just day-to-day dialogue in the workplace. Neglecting responsibilities across the board, so a fall in performance at work, and this might be quite unusual for a person to not be seeing things through, or not being able to take responsibility for themselves or responsibility for others, or their role in the workplace. Changes in personal appearance, I think, is always a key factor. Stopping people start to neglect themselves, may not be looking as well groomed as normal, personal hygiene, presentation, not paying attention, or caring about how they look. And it's a representation, I think, of how we feel about ourselves is how we present ourselves in our style of dress. So if that suddenly starts to change in somebody, then we would notice that they are feeling very differently about themselves. Moving more slowly, yes, this is I think this is quite subtle sometimes, isn't it, to notice with people, but people seeming fatigued and weary and moving more slowly, feeling heavy, and the body feels heavy, and then they're just not lively or enthusiastic and moving slowly. Again, being agitated is the converse of this, isn't it? I'm feeling agitated and jumpy and irritable. So all sorts of changes that we might see in somebody's behaviour and presentation. Thoughts become impaired, we tend to get very fixated on negative core beliefs and negative things that we believe about ourselves during episodes of depression. We would definitely see impaired memory and impaired cognition. When the brain is coping with depression, the cognitive functions, which are the higher thinking skills, go offline to a greater extent, and in order to cope with what's going on in other parts of the brain. So yes, we would see impaired performance, impaired memory. Indecisiveness is a classic symptom of depression. Confusion and inability to make judgments, impaired judgment and poor judgment. And then, of course, all of this can start to lead, particularly the feelings of helplessness and hopelessness and feeling trapped inside yourself and a situation and the circumstances of everything, can start to lead to suicidal thoughts. People who, quite often say, "Oh no, I'm not thinking about taking my life, and I wouldn't kill myself." But quite frankly, the only way that I think I could feel differently, or this could stop, is if I wasn't alive anymore. Those are, that's not a suicide plan, but that is a very concerning thing for someone to say, and they'll often brush it off. But if you hear people speaking like that, then this is really something that you need to take seriously. Physical symptoms we've talked about: chronic fatigue, unrelenting fatigue and weariness, lack of motivation, lack of enjoyment in things that a person has previously been very motivated by. Sleeping too much and sleeping too little, sleep disturbance, weight gain, weight loss, and this can lead as well, with substance abuse to actually self-medicate, so using alcohol and unprescribed medications to medicate and take the mind off things. Other addictive behaviours, I think, as well as substance abuse, can be noted there as well. There's a whole range of addictive behaviours, compulsions, and everything that's an avoidance really of the depression. And then, as we've said here, unexplained aches and pains. And a question pops up before there about masked depression. How do we know if it's masked depression? It's a tricky one to diagnose, but anybody who is continually suffering from aches and pains or backache and periods of backache, but doesn't actually have anything physically wrong, organically wrong, then we would, this would start to flag up. Well, is this actually relating to anxiety and depression, which is overloading the nervous system? And then there are certain points within the body that will take the strain. Muscle groups become very tense, become very stressed, and then that can cause alignment of the spine and spinal issues, and aches and pains, muscular aches and pains in the body. So it is a difficult one to diagnose, and it's the one that probably goes most unnoticed. But yes, masked depression is there with those unexplained aches and pains. Thank you. Next slide. No, thank you. So depression is a kind of hypo response to depress and to squash down, and to repress and suppress. Anxiety is the opposite of this. Anxiety is hyper arousal of the nervous system. I'm going to talk about stress in a minute, but anxiety is a clinical manifestation, and stress is part of it. So anxiety is basically fear-based, and is a heightened response to fear. Now the fear, I think in our everyday, in our modern lives, can come from many sources. I've chosen this particular picture of this guy kind of leaning against the train, and that there's many kind of scenarios that we could come up with for him. It's overloading, isn't it? The guy looks overloaded. He's got to get on this train. We don't know what's happened to him, but he is, he could be having a panic attack before he gets on the train. There are many scenarios that we could look at for him. Anxiety occurs when the brain and the nervous system are overloaded with, or flooded with cortisol and adrenaline. Normally when something happens that puts us onto high alert or causes a hyper arousal response, if we had a graph, it would our cortisol and adrenaline levels shoot up, so that the body is prepared for a fight or flight response to that situation. And then it would in a normal situation, everything would, all the body responses would kind of come back on a steep curve back to baseline. So if we assume that we're kind of resting at baseline, a healthy baseline, most of the time, we can cope with sudden episodes of fear or anxiety, which is there to create, and our body responds to help us as a survival instinct. What happens where the fear is unrelenting and unresolvable is that the anxiety stays on a high bar, if you like. The cortisol and the adrenaline levels don't come down. They don't come back to baseline, and they start to remain on a very high level. And this is where we start to experience anxiety disorder or unrelenting anxiety. So we remain in this very high state of alert, and eventually, that flooding of cortisol and adrenaline becomes toxic and starts to cause changes to the brain chemistry. And actually, in children, and with developmental anxiety, starts to cause changes to the way that the brain is organised. So what we would experience in states of anxiety, or when we're starting to have kind of clinical anxiety, are again the somatic features, which are the raised heart rate and raised blood pressure. So the cortisol and adrenaline is preparing the body to fight or run away. So the body is flooded, the organs are flooded with these pumped and primed ready in the muscles, and stay on that state. And in order to do that, we have to have a higher heart rate and higher blood pressure. There's the muscles prepare for action. So just as we were saying before, that with the masked depression, which is the converse of this, we can get extreme body problems through a state of heightened anxiety, because the muscles are staying on a state of high alert as well. So we get fatigue, we get overwhelmed, and then the body gets kind of toxic with all of this stress and fatigue in the muscles. So we start to get episodes of tiredness, or conversely, being unable to sleep, because the brain is just constantly on high alert. So we will see sleep disorders with states of anxiety, somatic features like we've said, and we will also see overloading of all of that in terms of panic attacks, and people actually very, very scary panic attacks can feel like people are having heart attacks or strokes, and the body will eventually cut off into a point of what we call dissociation and collapse. Very unpleasant symptoms anxiety causes. We will see people being overreactive to small issues that may seem very small to the rest of us, and things that they may normally be able to cope with really well. But when they're in a state of anxiety, total overreaction. I think catastrophizing is something that people tend to do here, and will imagine all sorts of awful scenarios happening, and their thoughts running away with them, causing this whole cycle of anxiety. Diagnosable anxiety disorders, panic disorders, social anxiety disorder is quite common as well, where people actually become the source of the fear, and phobias. A number of phobias would also be related to anxiety disorders. Again, there are medications, SSRIs, as I mentioned before. Sertraline is a particularly useful SSRI to help with anxiety and obsessive compulsive behaviours that occur to avoid feelings of anxiety. There are different types of stronger medications which then have sedatives in them, which will help to relieve the symptoms of anxiety and allow someone to manage. Again, psychotherapy, treatments such as cognitive behaviour therapy, EMDR is very useful and a very quick treatment for anxiety. Obviously counselling and psychodynamic therapy to get to the root causes of the problems. But I think with anxiety, it really is giving people some understanding of what's happening to them, and then helping them with a toolkit of managing their stress levels in certain situations. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, just a quick mention here about stress, which I think is half of the word distress. Where are we likely to start to experience feelings of depression, of anxiety and stress in the workplace? Well, this is a very simple diagram, which I think explains that we become stressed when the demands are outweighed by the resources that we have. So huge demands upon us, and then the resources that we have to actually manage those demands are diminished, or are literally unavailable to us. So we really do need to think about this in terms of the general kind of workplace. People are managing demands and resources in their personal lives. They're also managing demands and resources in the workplace. If we don't give people the resources to manage their role and their expectations in the workplace, they will become stressed. Unresolved stress leads to anxiety and depression. So this is a whole area in itself, obviously, but I'm just putting this up today as a topic for thought, really, in the workplace, and how we are managing that. And we have a personal responsibility, don't we? We all have personal responsibility, but as employers and managers, human resource managers, we have to look at people's job descriptions. We have to look at whether they have the resources to meet what they are required to do. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, just have a sip of water, excuse me. Okay, so just a quick run through really here of what you can do, some tips really in the work environment to assist with and to manage mental health and emotional well-being. Mental health first aiders are crucial. I I really promote the concept of having an identified well-being champion who is mental health first aid trained. This should be a designated role. If it's a very small organisation, you could still have your go-to person, but this person does need training. They need training in knowing when to have and how to have a difficult conversation with somebody. They need skills to be able to do that. And they also need more in-depth training about spotting the signs and knowing how to signpost and what the limitations of the first aider are. I would like to see mental health first aiders as common in the workplace as physical first aiders are. This is just as important. Mental health first aiders can save lives just as physical first aiders can. The mental health first aider, the wellbeing champion, should have access to clinical supervision on a regular basis, which is provided by a professional psychotherapist and clinical supervisor. And just as we said before, when resources outweigh demand, when demand outweigh resources, this person is likely to pick up secondary trauma and transference, and also will need supervision to deal with the boundaries of their role. Equality, diversity and inclusion is key to mental health in the workplace. I was lucky enough to do a seminar a few months ago about EDI and mental health. People who, again, it's a whole subject area in itself, but people who don't feel included and feel isolated are very, very, very vulnerable to mental health, anxiety, and stress disorders. Try and think about meetings, having meetings in the workplace where people can talk about my experience of. It's a bit like circle time, isn't it, at school? But, people inviting people to talk about, just briefly, their experiences if they've been off with depression or anxiety, or have had an episode of depression in their lives, or have other types of mental health issues or well-being issues. And in a safe and contained way, to speak briefly and share aspects of that with their colleagues. Signposting to professional services for assessment and treatment. As I said earlier, JSA provide a full signposting service of assessment and treatment. But it's really important that the workplace, the wellbeing champion, is able to refer on. Accessing then counselling, psychotherapy and occupational psychology. Counselling can be very brief. Brief solution-focused sessions can assist people in 1 or 2 sessions. Conflict resolution in the workplace and coaching and mentoring are all facilities that you can put in place to assist with people's mental health and well-being and stress, causes of stress in the workplace. Thank you. Next slide. Okay, let's have a quick dip into the pandemic. Now that we've kind of established some issues, some facts around depression and anxiety and stress, what on earth has just happened to us in those 49 weeks? Well, on a psychosocial level, if we think about the initial impact of the pandemic, our human instinct is to flock. When we're under threat, we flock. We all pull together and we all flock to survive. And what actually happened here was that we were unable to do this, and that other people, proximity to others, which is our survival instinct, became a source of fear. So we actually became afraid of each other and other people in the first instance. And I think if we look at I've been very interested here in looking at the Kubler-Ross theory of loss. It's actually a bereavement and grief cycle, but it's also about loss. And I think what we lost was our sense of safety in the world and in our whole lives. And we go through some very distinct stages in loss. The first is shock and numbness. And I'm saying these, and I just want you to reflect on the whole 12 months that we've just been through. Shock and numbness, denial, anger, and then move towards acceptance of the loss, and then accommodation and adaptation to that loss. And I think it's really interesting just to reflect for a moment on what we've done as a society and as businesses and as people, as individuals, to cope with what hit us in every single aspect of our lives, our personal lives, family lives, and our working lives, and our society, communities and society, and how we've actually moved and what we've seen happen over this year in respect of those changes. I think we need to think about the impact of remote working. The slide here shows the gentleman who's very together, isn't he? Sitting there, with his laptop and books on his croissant and his apple, very together. And then we've got the other guy here who is looking stressed and fatigued, and they've been. What I would say coming out of this is, as businesses, you really discuss with people what they have experienced with remote working and how now they're going to adjust back, or are they going to adjust back. People have been working from home with children and homeschooling, and I do like this picture here because this baby's got a bottle of wine in the background there, which I think says it all, really, doesn't it? But yes, what toll has this taken on employees? A lot of people may be absolutely desperate to get, and then people who work at JSA and Life Change Care, and the administrators who have been at home are desperate to get back to work and to get back into an adult environment. So taking into account the fantastic changes that this has brought for us all, but also some very difficult changes. And to what level as an organisation are you expecting people to adjust from this? So really, it's crucial to be allowing staff time to reflect and share their experiences of the pandemic, but also to share the vision of the new normal with them. Inclusion on that. Thank you. Next slide. Last really thing to say here is, activities. What can you do to help people back in? Activities to create a sense of inclusion and connection. These can be done online. I think bringing the fun back into social online events. We had a great idea from one of the staff, which was to do an online spin the wheel that we do once a month. And one person is invited in to spin the wheel, and then a person, all the names have gone in a hat, and the person gets a prize. And it's just a bit of fun that we do, but people have really enjoyed it. But starting to look at how people can adjust back and what kind of social activities you can get on the map for people. Strategies to see if people are okay, checking in, wellbeing champions, and providing support for people if they're not okay, and if the impact of the pandemic for them has really left a toll. Okay, thank you. That's the last of my slides. I think just to finish this morning on a quote by an unknown person. Sometimes what makes a person, what a person needs is not a brilliant mind that speaks, but a patient heart that listens. And I think I'll leave you all today on that point. Thank you very much for your time and for listening.
Thank you, Julie. That was really insightful. I know we had one question in the chat that you took as we went through, but if anyone has got any questions that they want to put to Julie while we've got her. Would seem a waste to not put it to good use. Send me just put something in the chat box, or just wave wildly at the camera if you like, and we'll come to you. I'm not seeing anyone waving wildly. Sure, someone's got a question. I'll throw one at you just to warm everyone up, Julie. From my point of view, I ran my own business for, I don't know, 15 years. I've been at the Chamber for a couple of years, and that's the first time I've seen that level of just kind of training, definition and description of what the conditions are. How big an issue do you think that is? Because certainly from some of the employers that I've worked with, they see the D word and the A word as maybe a fake symptom that people like to throw around, and there's almost there's a mistrust amongst some leaders of businesses, and then that then leads to a reluctance and a hidden culture of people not wanting to disclose their symptoms and talk about their illness. How much of a problem is that?
I think it's a huge problem. I think it's a huge problem, and a very, very sad problem. When you think about the statistics and the amount of people who will experience periods of depression and anxiety, and the number of people who are stressed, and the number of people whose stress will go on to cause depression and anxiety, and these are unpleasant illnesses, very unpleasant illnesses. And I think people we need every single, change starts with the individual, doesn't it? Every single one of us, whether you've experienced anxiety and depression and stress or not, should approach these illnesses with compassion, approach people with compassion and understanding. And we need to take responsibility to allow people to feel safe enough and not stigmatized, and to be able to come forward and seek help. If you have a wellbeing champion in your workplace, then that is the start, isn't it? To give people the chance to speak to someone, and somebody also who has time to notice. It's noticing, it's listening with a hearing ear, and it's noticing the whole person. And I think this comes to actually having time to get to know each other in the workplace as well. These are all basic human things that we've lost because we're so busy, and we've become afraid of anxiety and depression. It's nothing to be afraid of. It's curable. And one of the things that I always say to people when I first see them in a consultation, and I feel, I sense and can see how much they're suffering, is, you don't have to live like this. There is treatment, and you don't have to feel like this. Life is short. And life is for enjoying and for feeling an optimal health. You don't have to feel like this. There is a way out of this. And the relief that I've seen people when actually I can say that to them is enormous. And that's the first step on the ladder. So it's a simple approach, isn't it? To be able to say that to someone with confidence is, there is treatment. And you don't have to live your life like this. You can share that with people on that level. But I think it starts with compassion and kindness, and actually allowing people, giving people permission to be able to talk and seek help for such common problems.
There seems to have been more of that permission around maybe in the last 12 months. Is that maybe one of the positives to have come out of all this, that at least the awareness of it and the discussion of it has been greater?
Isn't it? Yes. And this we need to celebrate, and we need to embrace. That I think it's given people permission You know, and we're seeing little adverts on the TV, little well-being things popping up on the television, which I absolutely adore, and you know, which say, you know, it's okay not to be okay. There's everybody's feeling like this. We've all been hit with this. We've all been knocked off our perches. And there are little mindfulness things on the BBC and little things like this cropping up. You know, how fantastic to be able to create that in the workplace and access to that in the workplace. But yes, it is one of the gifts that the pandemic has given us for sure. Great, JSA is currently busier. We're overwhelmed. We're busier than we've ever been in 17 years. But that is fantastic because people are coming forward.
Helping people. Right, I've got a queue of questions. So
right.
I'll come to Claire in a moment. But first, is it Zafisha? Zafisha, do you want to unmute yourself and put your question directly to Julie? Maybe Zafisha's not got a microphone.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Question was, you know what you said about in the workplace having a well-being champion and, you know, being able to spot these things in others. What about if your workplace is your home environment, not because of lockdown, but say you're self-employed and like me, you're a home baker. So it's like it's sort of my duty to spot all these things. What about if someone didn't have that level of awareness on mental health and wasn't, you know, a dedicated researcher? How would they, what advice would you give?
I'm working at home on your own, and is it I'm just sort of teasing out there from is it your role to spot this in other people, but you're working remotely?
No, I mean, so there's only one person in my business, which is me. You know, I'm a home baker. That's what I'm saying. So I don't have a team.
Right.
And
right.
What would you say that would be more applicable for this?
Right.
Because like the only people that I can think of if I'm working from home all the time would be my family, and it's like not everyone has that awareness. Whereas if you're in a workplace, everyone has a certain expectation of a certain understanding.
Yes, so absolutely. Yeah, and then this is being isolated, isn't it? And not having access to other people to talk to. I guess really, what I would advise is that if that you have access maybe to a professional service, such as ours or others. Or CGP. I know it's difficult. A lot of people kind of roll their eyes when we say speak to your GP, but GPs are very clued up. But you know, sometimes a chat on the phone to talk about the kind of issues that you're facing can be really, really helpful, and you can work out there whether it might be something where you would want to access a professional kind of service, such as ours or another, which can actually assist you in the workplace with things that you're dealing with. The other thing that you could think about is maybe joining up with other people who are in similar positions, and maybe having a chat group or a little support group for each other. You know, that you can do online, and then seeing how you get on with something like that, where it's not colleagues, but you've got people in similar situations, and you've got a support group around. But you know, don't remain isolated. If you're finding that you haven't got people to speak to, I would certainly reach out and just check out. There are charitable organisations as well that you can speak to. You know, you can just pick up the phone and speak to folks. But I wouldn't let that continue. I would certainly take some steps just to check yourself out.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say thank you for the whole session. I've made lots of notes, and it's definitely made certain things clearer with all the things you've explained. So just thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. I'm really pleased that this has helped you. Yeah, fantastic. But do reach out if you, if you need to
Yeah.
talk through. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the questions, Afisha. And of course, within a couple of months, the Chamber Network will be back up and doing all sorts of meetings that you're more than welcome to attend. And if you happen to bring home baking with you, then
Yes.
we're not going to turn you away, I'm going to take Claire Thwaite. Claire, do you want to put your question directly to...
Yeah, cheers, Simon. Hiya, Julie. Thanks for the presentation.
Hello.
Really, really good. My question's more, I guess, around kind of business orientated stuff. So as a business owner, how would you advise business owners to balance the support that's needed for employees? Because obviously in an ideal world, we'd all love to just throw as much time and money at somebody as possible to get better, but it's not practical. It's not financially viable. So where do you think the balance needs to lie in how employers can effectively support their employees?
I think that I agree, actually. I think if you were considering putting support in for employees, that it needs to be assessed very carefully, first of all, and it needs to be time bound. And I would also recommend that employees contribute towards that, so that it isn't a totally free service. Because counselling and psychotherapy in the private sector is expensive, because we're all very highly trained and as professionals, clinical professionals don't cheat, and neither should they. So I think that a contribution is important because it adds some sense of value and also some sense of agency, I think, for that person, and some sense of responsibility for their own well-being. So time-bound, assessed, clearly assessed, professionally, time-bound, and asking for a contribution where the person can do that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Catherine's just put a comment in, and I can heartily recommend this. Dave Scholes runs a group called Mindsight. Roast and Toast is the morning network group, which is very, very focused on mental well-being.
Wow.
And I went to school with his dad was my teacher. His dad was my sex education teacher, actually, randomly at Barding High School many years ago. But Dave's a lovely bloke, so do look up Mindsight or Roast and Toast. Back to my list of questions. Sandra Strong. Sandra, do you want to put a question into Julie, please?
Thank you. What I wanted to say was we have 2 mental health first aiders. The HR team is 2 people. But I'm just wondering if you think that a wellbeing champion sits better within the HR group or outside of the HR group.
Oh, that's an interesting question. I would say they probably sit better if you're a big organisation and you've got an HR group. I would say that they sit better within the HR group because of the connection, the professional connection then to resources and accommodation. Companies obviously who haven't got an HR facility, I think should appoint the wellbeing champion. But I think that the wellbeing champion should have access to the HR team. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah.
Great, thanks. I'm going to take one more question, and then I'm going to have to save all the others. Either if we've got room at the end, or we'll send the full chat history. And get them responded to individually, because I just want to make sure we give Emma sufficient time. However, Jill Bailey has dropped the gender bomb. So,
okay.
Jill, do you want to give us your question? I think there is one other male on the call. I want to give full recognition to Dean, who's somewhere in the cloud there. So, Jill, do you want to put your question?
Yeah, Julie, I just noticed when I was going through that there is an absence of males this morning, yes. And I could only see Simon here. And I wondered if the topic automatically turns some males off, considering the fact that I know 3 males at the moment who are depressed. So is that a common thing?
It is, yes. Yes, guys, you know, it certainly is. And I think we still have a lot of work to do to encourage men to be able to access assistance. There are some horrendous suicide statistics for men. I haven't got them to hand, so I'm not going to quote them, just to say they are horrendous. And I think, depression is, they say, is the curse of the strong, don't they? That trying to be strong and not be emotionally vulnerable or afraid of stigma. There's so much that goes on around this, isn't there? But yes, men certainly do need to access support. And I think there are plenty of there's a good mix of counsellors and psychotherapists, but on the whole, I think it is dominated by by females in the profession. I don't know whether that causes a lack of access, but I think it's generally a sense of stigma, isn't it, and failure or being weak. Women are naturally more able to talk about their emotions, I think, than men. But we need to change that, don't we? We need to change that. So yes, making this more accessible and more okay. I have a friend actually who has an organisation called Big Boys Don't Cry, and he's based in Liverpool, and he's been running that counselling practice for many years, and we need more access for men. So as employers, maybe think about and the wellbeing champions think about how it's an EDI issue, isn't it? How are you going to make this more accessible for men? Thank you. Really
Thanks, Julie. I love Big Boys Don't Cry.
Yes.
I cry at bargain hunt, so I don't know what that says about me. Right, I'm gonna wrap up the Q&A. Apologies, I know we've not been able to get to everyone's questions, but I need to make sure we bring on Emma, because Emma always provides us some really useful information in this forum. We're always really grateful to our sponsors, of course, Forbes solicitors, who sponsor the HR forum. Emma is a partner at Forbes, head of commercial employment. She works with clients a variety of sizes in contentious and non-contentious matters. Key sectors that she works with include manufacturing, construction, hospitality. She works with her clients not only as an employment lawyer, but also as an accessible and attentive business advisor. And I'm sure you'll find her both accessible and attentive this morning. Over to you, Emma.
Thank you very much, Simon. And while Simon's just putting on the slides again, I was just going to comment on something that Jill had raised in her question, and Julie has touched on. And indeed, Simon, in a little bit of a respect, when he asked his question earlier. And that's that one of the things that I'm experiencing as an advisor to a lot of businesses is that we are having a much healthier conversation with business leaders dealing with employees with mental health issues as a result of the pandemic. So it is one positive that we can take, that the awareness is there. Once upon a time, we would have a lot of cynicism from the people we were giving advice to over someone who'd rung up with anxiety and stress, and was it really that big a problem, and is it just that they're using this as an excuse, for example. Whereas now we've seen a lot of individuals, particularly male leaders, who are suddenly having challenges themselves and suddenly facing mental health issues themselves, particularly those who are suddenly working from home, possibly seeing they're juggling, as working parents, juggling homeschooling, juggling elder relatives and trying to support them through this, and doing the home delivery shopping and what have you for parents. And they're suddenly realizing that it impacts on people in very, very different ways. And I think that is something positive, because it is meaning that people are more willing to acknowledge how this is affecting people in different ways and starting to talk about it. And we've definitely seen a change in the approach that people are taking with us when they come to us to talk things through and how to deal with HR situations and supporting people. It is becoming less from that cynical point of view, and actually more about, we're actually concerned about this person and how can we help, rather than we think that this person is using this as an excuse to avoid doing X, Y, and Z. So just picking up on that. And also the last slide, Julie, absolutely love that. As Julie knows, I experienced some quite horrific bereavements in my late teens, and I only met my husband when I was 20. We've been together 20 odd years now, and even now I still have to say to him, and he's had, you know, stress when he was in the police and what have you, still have to say to him now, I don't need your male logic, I can work this out myself. I know what I need to do. I'm an intelligent woman. I just need you to listen and maybe tell me it's going to be okay. And 20 years on, I still have to tell him that. So we might have a breakthrough at some point. The children are getting a lot better with it. But I think that whether we're working from home by ourselves, whether, like Fisher, we might be a sole worker, it might be our own business, or whether we're working with a team, it's about listening. And the biggest problem with employment issues that end up in tribunal is that people, sorry, I've got a workman just going, he's waving at me. Automatic, you want to wave back, don't you, through the window. The biggest issue that we see in tribunals is that employees say, we didn't think someone was listening to us and people weren't communicating with us. And if we can solve what to me seems a very common sense and easy thing, doesn't cost us anything, then we should avoid a lot more tribunals. So with that in mind, if we move to the first slide, I'm going to talk to you about 3 cases that we have dealt with in the Forbes employment team over the last 49 weeks, and just give you a flavour of some of the issues that have been faced and some of the ways that we've addressed it. I was going to do this as a bit more interactive, but we've had such an amazing session with Julie that we are a little bit shorter on time, but do feel free to pop any comments in the chat, or we can pick up at the end. But just to talk you through the first case study. This was a food production company, primarily specialising in more large-scale production, with the bulk of its produce being sold to the catering industry. The employee had been employed at the company for over 3 years as a packaging line assistant, and previously had had a good attendance record and no warnings on his HR file. In April of last year, as a result of the pandemic, the company had seen a decline in profits. Obviously, supporting the catering industry, it didn't have as much sales. They also needed to ensure social distancing in the factory. The employee was one of 12 packaging assistants. So the business took the view that they were going to furlough half of the packaging assistants, and 6 were furloughed. All of them were women who had asked for time off because they also had issues with childcare. The male employee had been very unhappy because he was asked to remain and wasn't put on furlough. And he started suggesting that he felt unsafe at work and that he was suffering from stress and anxiety. The employee, when we started working them, had been absent 4 times since April 2020 through the course of last year, each absence lasting 2 to 3 days at a time. And they came to us because they'd reached their short-term sickness absence trigger point. So if we move on to slide 2, what were some of the things that we talked about? And I'm not going to go into everything in depth, but I'm just going to flag some of the things that you need to be aware of in a situation like this. The first thing, obviously, that we picked up on from the legal perspective was that this employee, if not treated right, would have the right to bring a claim for unfair dismissal if the business sacked him, Or if we didn't handle it correctly, a claim for constructive unfair dismissal. And constructive unfair dismissal is where someone resigns and they say that the company's behaviour or actions have effectively forced them into resigning. So because he had more than 2 years service, we had to be aware of that risk of an unfair dismissal claim. We also had to be mindful that under section 100 of the Employment Rights Act, he did have the legal right to resign and claim constructive dismissal because he believed that he was in serious and imminent danger. So by him refusing to work, we had to be very aware of the fact that there are health and safety protections for employees in those circumstances. So what did we do? We talked to the HR team about making sure that they were managing his absence fairly and objectively. At the outset, when they had started looking at his initial absences, it was from that cynical point of view of how can he be stressed and anxious? He's got a job. Other people are losing their jobs in this pandemic. He should be grateful. So we tried to work with them to help their managers take a different mindset. Ensuring steps were taken to try and keep him in the workplace as long as possible. We did talk through with them getting occupational health advice, and we looked at someone who would also specialise in health and safety, because what we wanted to do was to help guide the support that was being offered with an understanding around the health and safety, because we wanted to really make sure that this individual understood the steps that had been taken from a health and safety perspective, but also what he could be doing himself to protect himself for health and safety, but also to understand, be able to, for him to understand what the company could and couldn't do, because obviously there were some steps from health and safety point of view that simply weren't necessary or that they simply couldn't do, to understand that as well. We also talk to them about the potential for this individual being classed as a disabled employee, and how that interacts with employment legislation under the Equality Act. Now, what we were looking at here is whether his anxiety and his stress was there to such a degree that it would actually be classed as a disability. And whilst it is absolutely critical that you get medical help in assessing someone's mental impairment, it is actually a legal question, is whether someone is disabled for employment purposes. So it then is a matter for the employee, for the company, the employer, to make the decision, and that's where we often come in and help. And the definition of disability, for those of you who aren't aware, under employment legislation, is under Section 6 of the Equality Act. And it talks about someone having a mental or a physical impairment that has a substantive, long-term adverse effect on the ability to do day-to-day activities. And I just want to pick up on a couple of things there that are really important and that people often fail to realise. First thing is the long term. And what we have to realise is that sometimes, and Julie touched on this, is that sometimes individuals will experience stress or anxiety because of a short period of time as a direct result of something that's happened to them. That does not necessarily mean that it's going to be long term, and therefore they may not necessarily be a disabled employee, even if for that short period of time, whether it's a few days, a few weeks, a few months, that they are going to be disabled. In general terms, long term is classed as 12 months or longer. They don't have to have been experiencing this for 12 months, but if the medical evidence suggests that they will suffer with this for more than 12 months, or it is something that is recurred over time. So Julie talked about the cyclical depression, so something that may come back, you know, at once every few years, over a period of time, then that is going to be captured. It also deals with long-term, whether it's life-ending, and that is typically more where we're looking at physical situations. where that will kick in. But it's really important to deal with that. Also, some businesses want to just look at the activities in work. It isn't about just what someone can or can't do in work. It is their whole life that the employment tribunal will be taking into account. And the focus is on the negatives with the tribunal. The focus is on what can't they do that is a day-to-day activity, not looking at well, they can do this and they can do that, so why can't, why are they defined as a disabled person? So it's a very broad concept, and it needs a lot of thought at an early stage, so that you ensure that you are then supporting that person, both from the mental health and all the positive things that we need to be doing with our employees, regardless of whether they're classed as a disabled person or not, but also making sure that then under the Equality Act, we address the actual legal duties that we have to someone who has a disability as a result of a mental impairment. And that legal duty is to make reasonable adjustments. So when we first started looking at this and we got some initial advice, it didn't seem to be the case that this person was likely to be considered as a disabled person, which at first the manager the manager's response was, oh, well, we don't need to do anything about it then. And I said, whoa, that is exactly the response that you should not make, and you should not be communicating that to the individual. Regardless of whether someone has a disability or not, there is a legal obligation to ensure that we protect the health and safety of employees. Health and safety isn't just making sure that someone knows how to lift boxes on the production line, it also extends to someone's mental health. So forget the disability point at the moment. Let's focus on the health and safety of all our employees, and what are we going to do about that. So what we talked about from the HR process side, we talked about getting some medical information so that we knew to the extent that this individual was suffering from anxiety and from depression. We also looked at having some communications with him around the health and safety to give him some reassurances about what we were doing, what we could do, listening to him to see if he had any other ideas, whether there are any particular things that were causing him concern that we could then try and remedy. We also made sure that the business looked very closely at what their employment assistance programme had in place. It was only a very basic level, and we looked at what additional support they could put in place for this individual, but as well as more widely what counselling support, what mental health support that they had. So they are actually going through a process now of looking at training individuals for the mental health first aid. They do now have a policy for mental health and wellbeing, and signposting individuals to different organisations and charities who provide telephone support, etc. And we also then have spent quite a bit of time revisiting with them so that they are continuing to have regular discussions with him. Now, I'm pleased to say that in his case, he has since his last episode of absence before Christmas and the client coming to us, he's not had any absence this year. He understands now that he is safe in work and is engaging with that process. He is actually receiving some counselling to help him through the anxiety and stress. And one of the other things that we talked about was the decision not to put him on furlough and to use it for the working mums. Now, from a HR perspective, we talked about the way that the individuals have been chosen for furlough, and talked through with the business about ensuring that they weren't discriminating. But when we also talked to him, or they talked to him with us giving a bit of guidance, it was important for him to realise why those individuals have been selected. He didn't have any caring responsibilities. if he'd been put on furlough, yes, he would have benefited from still receiving 80% of his pay and having time on his hands to do things. And he was quite keen on getting out in his garden and doing some jobs around the house. But he also then understood how hard it would have been for some of his colleagues if they'd been trying to find childcare support when they had to come into work because of the very nature of the production line. It's simply something that they couldn't do from home. And when he had that greater awareness of what his colleagues could also be experiencing from their mental health perspective, it also then helped him get on board. So a positive story, and hopefully that will continue. Next one, Simon, please. Thank you. Now, this one is in relation to an employee who's employed as a receptionist and had been employed since September 2019. In March of last year, the employee's partner was advised to shield as a result of serious underlying health conditions. The business is closed until July 2020, so she and many of her colleagues were furloughed. The business reopened on the 4th of July last year. However, her partner was still encouraged to shield. The company agreed to extend her furlough until August 2020. And at the end of August last year, she was due to return to work and she was refusing. And that's when they came to us. And if we move on a slide. So here, first of all, some of the issues that we talked about from the employment law angle was the fact that because she had got less than 2 years service, she was going to be unable to bring a claim for ordinary unfair dismissal or constructive unfair dismissal. But what we had to look at was whether there was a risk of any discrimination there, a potential risk for discriminating against her because her partner was classed as a disabled person, and under the Equality Act there is protection for associated disability discrimination, so we were mindful of that. We were also conscious and discussed with her that whilst it started out as her being concerned about her partner's health and safety, it could quite easily slip to her, particularly because at the time there was an awful lot of press around teachers returning to work, and the fact that, as I've discussed with the previous case study, under Section 100 of the Employment Rights Act, an individual who feels as though they are at serious and imminent danger to their health, that they can potentially refuse to come into work. So we needed to make sure that it didn't slip into her saying that she was concerned for her for her health and safety, because that would have enabled her to pursue a claim as well. Because for claims around health and safety and claims for discrimination, you don't need to have any service. So that was an important thing for them to be mindful of. At the time that we came in to advise, she'd refused to come back and she had then actually gone AWOL. So we had a potential disciplinary issue here as well because she wasn't following the absence reporting procedures. She'd started to hit the trigger points for managing her absence as well. And it was also considered whether they should be extending the furlough again for her. So there are a lot of things in HR's mind. So the first thing that we talked about doing was trying to engage with her to have a conversation, just any form of communication, because she wasn't responding. And we assisted with a very carefully worded letter that was sent to her home, trying to really look at the positives and the fact that we needed to have a conversation with her to understand her concerns, and that we wanted to look, certainly initially, extending furlough to her, because at that stage the government obviously had extended it, so we were going to be able to do that, and we needed to ensure that she was talking to us in order to support that, because we were concerned that she wasn't following the absence management procedure, the absence management process, and we wanted to make sure that she understood the potential consequences and what she wanted to do about this. So just, I don't think I mentioned, did I, that the individual, it was in the hospitality sector that we were working. So when we did manage to get her to talk to us, we understood more around what her concerns were around her partner and what parts of her role she felt exposed her to risk if she came back into the business. And what they actually did was they put in some support for her with some flexi furlough. So they were actually going through some redundancies because of the very nature of what they were doing in hospitality. And they said to her that as a result of those redundancies, they didn't want to put her at risk of redundancy. And so they actually worked with her and some of the individuals that they were retaining so that she was then enabled on a flexible furlough basis to continue with the parts of the role that she could do from home. And individuals who still had part of their job in the workplace, but had seen a decrease in their work, then picked up the extra work that she couldn't physically get in to do. So what it meant was that she had the benefit of being partly on furlough, so having some income still from that, being able to be paid fully for the job that she was able to do from home. And then the individuals who had been at risk of redundancy actually were able to do 100% of a job in work, but part of their job was then picking up what she did. And the intention is that next year, or sorry, this year now, because it's last year we were advising that this year hospitality will start getting back to more normal. Her partner will be vaccinated or have had his second vaccine, so she will feel more comfortable about coming out. She will resume to her normal work pattern, and the individual who's partly been doing her job and partly their own, because of hospitality, hopefully we'll see much more of an increase, that other individuals will be able to revert to 100% of their previous role rather than them being redundant. But what we've also done to try and help this person engage fully again is the business did have a very good counselling service that was attached to their employee assistance programme, and that individual is now engaging through that, so that when they do come back to hospitality being fully reopened, and we will want to be encouraging her to come back, because she doesn't have the legal right to stay at home. She's got a job to be done that they're perfectly entitled to expect her to come in and do, but by then hopefully she will have had some counselling to help her with any stress and anxiety that she's experiencing, and get those support in place for her. And Simon, do I have time for the last one? I'll whiz through this last case study.
Yeah, see how fast you can be.
Okay, cut me off if I need to. Okay, so this one, the employee had been with the business for 5 years. The business was unaware whether she had any underlying health conditions. She'd never said anything to them. She'd previously performed very well, but her performance had begun to decline since she was working remotely. Deadlines had been missed, and there was an indication that she was not accessing the internal system for the duration of her working hours, though the employee had maintained that she was still completing her full work hours. They had decided to place her on a formal improvement plan, and they'd had a formal meeting to discuss that. But after they'd had that formal meeting, she'd started to become much more withdrawn and quiet on team meetings, and they were concerned that her mental health seemed to be declining, and her performance seemed to be declining as well. And she started to suggest that she had been suffering from some mental health issues, but they weren't entirely clear on that. So just moving to what we got them to be considering. So obviously we touched again on whether this individual could potentially be disabled, and looked quite quickly at getting some support in place for her, and getting through the employee assistance programme that they had to explore that further with her. And in a meeting with her, they actually talked about what their concerns were with her, and whether it was actually the underlying mental health issue that she'd alluded to that was possibly impacting on her performance. They explained that obviously they didn't want to continue with performance management if there was a health issue, which is appropriate to do, is to pause any more formal processes if somebody does have a mental health issue that is actually directly impacting on their performance, and they sought medical advice for that. They also were then aware of the issue with the possibility that we're going to need reasonable adjustments. Now, we are still waiting for that medical evidence to come through, but really what I wanted to emphasise with this and with all the other case studies is that it's really important to understand what the signs are that Julie's talked us through this morning, to communicate with employees early on, don't let it start sliding, and then to put in place early interventions, whether that's counselling or therapy. Now at Forbes, we've taken this extremely seriously, as you probably hope that we would lead by example, and we've had a number of firm initiatives which do include providing access to counselling and therapy services, not just for our employees but family members as well, because we understand that family members suffering with mental health issues can then impact on our employees' mental health. We've had regular updates from our exec team, Q&As online, sending emails, and our exec, who are all men, have very openly talked about the challenges that they've been facing. Some of them have young children at home that they're trying to homeschool, a couple of them don't, but they've talked very openly and encouraged all the heads of departments to talk to their own employees about it. We've put in place Forbes Fitness, so we can all log on at lunchtimes and do 10-15 minutes without our cameras on. It's all blocked, so nobody is worried about that, to get us up and moving. In March, we're actually doing a charity month to raise money for our charity that is all around physical activity. We're trying to do the equivalent of Blackpool Tower to the Eiffel Tower, and clocking all our miles, steps, whatever people want to do. And again, it's with a view to encouraging people to feel as though we're all in it together, but also with a mind to physical health is good for our mental health. And then on a team level, we've encouraged, as well as continuing with monthly one-to-ones, with our weekly team meetings, but also having buddy systems where we have regular chats with our buddy, not about work, simply about what they are doing, are they getting out for walks, how are they feeling, to keep that up. And it's really important across all of these case studies to make sure that, yes, we are mindful of how it can go wrong from an employment perspective, but I would really strongly say, from my experience of 20 years of being an employment lawyer, that if you communicate, if you have the support in place and you engage staff, you are not going to have to pick up the phone to me and say, Emma, we've got a tribunal claim. It includes disability discrimination, automatic unfair dismissal for health and safety, and a whole mirage of other claims. You will in most cases avoid that if you talk to people early enough. Okay, Simon, I'll wrap it up there for you. I could talk forever. Like Julie, this is a huge passion of mine, is this area.
Thank you, Emma. And whilst there's obviously a business benefit in avoiding the tribunal, but the impact on that employee, those case studies you've talked about there, if the employer helps them through that difficult phase of their life, what you get back in return is employee retention, loyalty, so much back in spades compared to the potential hassle of a tribunal. So it's a win-win.
Yeah, absolutely. And in some circumstances, but very much in extreme cases, you will get the odd individual who realises that that working environment is not right for them, that it's not to do with the employer, it's because of their own personal circumstances, and they go. but they don't bring a claim because they have realised that this is something that they need to move on from, as opposed to blaming somebody. And again, that saves the tribunal, and it also saves the employer from having to go through a very messy dismissal process and the risk of a tribunal, when actually they've helped facilitate that person's own awareness. And I think self-awareness is a big part of this as well. I think it's very important, and one of the things that's come through from what we've been focusing on at Forbes is people also taking some responsibility for themselves. We've done a big push of make sure that you're getting out for a walk during the day. Don't wait till the end of the day when you finished work. It doesn't matter if you take 10-15 minutes extra at your lunch hour. Get out whilst it's sunny. That is better for our mental health, to be out whilst it's daylight. Take a bit of time, and also really encouraging people to be thinking about, are they going to bed at a reasonable time? Are they constantly on the phone, or can they switch it off? Encouraging people not to be drinking. I've done 2 bouts of no drinking during the pandemic. November I went dry, January I went dry, and it was because I knew that I was starting to feel angry. It's part of that loss cycle, Julie, feeling angry that I couldn't do what I wanted to do. And I thought, what can I do? What can I take control of? That helped me sleep better. I felt as though I wanted to eat healthier. I did more physical exercise, and it done me a lot of good. And I'm not going to go teetotal, don't worry. The presidents do for the chamber. I will be toasting a glass of something to all being there together. But it is something that's really important, I think.
Good. Well, good, and good to know you'll be raising a glass with us in October. Right. I'm not able to bring in questions just because I'm conscious that we've overrun. It's 11:15. We will, in the follow-up email, we'll have Emma's contact details. Emma's always delighted to hear from people individually and respond to you personally on any specific questions that have arisen from this morning. We'll also include the slides from today and Julie's contact details as well. And I think just from me, just a thank you to you both, because it's been thought-provoking, insightful and useful on a personal level, I'm sure, to everyone, but also on a professional level as well. And people are going to go away and I would hope make some decisions that are positive for their businesses. So thank you, Emma. Thank you, Julie. Please do check out the Chamber website for all our upcoming webinars and those 2 dates, the next HR forum. And Emma, I'm thinking, I should probably tell you this offline, but I'm thinking something around, maybe we need to factor in the vaccine. I think there's going to be a lot of questions, certainly by July, as most of the population will have been done by then, around what an employer can insist on and what we can't insist on. So I think that might be a useful topic to cover, amongst other things, at our HR forum on the 6th of July.
Absolutely, we can certainly do that, Simon.
Put it in your diary. Right. Have a wonderful day and go for a walk, everybody. Take care. Thanks for watching this ChamberLIVE video from the East Lancashire Chamber of Commerce. If you've enjoyed this content, then you might enjoy some of the other content that's on the screen now. Please do subscribe to our YouTube channel.